Good afternoon. My name is Michael Savoy. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the California Board of Accountancy. First order of business, let's take a roll call. Start with Mr. Jacobson, please.
Dan Jacobson.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Trina Salazar.
Mary Jiang.
Sochi Leon.
Mark Silverman. George Familet.
Michael Savoy.
Deirdre Robinson.
Jose Campos.
Okay, we have a quorum. The CBA's mission is to protect consumers by ensuring only qualified licensees practice public accountancy in accordance with established professional standards. This mission is derived from the statutory requirement that protection of the public shall be the highest priority of the California Board of Accountancy in exercising its licensing, regulatory, and disciplinary functions. Whenever the protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. You may notice that our board members are referencing tablets during the meeting. The tablets are allowed each board member to more easily access meeting materials and are not being used to discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item within the board's jurisdiction. Firstly, I'd like to introduce one of our new board members, Mary Jiang. She was appointed by California Board of Accountancy by Governor Brown in August of 2018. She's been a principal owner at Mary Jiang CPA firm since 2013 and a financial advisor at HD Vest Financial Services since 1999. She's held several positions at the Franchise Tax Board from 1994 to 2013, including tax auditor, audit supervisor, and program specialists. She was a manager of the administration of a World Savings and Loan and manager of the accounting of the Federal Reserve Bank in San Francisco. She's also the president of the Oakland Rotary Endowment and member of the California Society of CPAs. Amongst other things, we'd really love to welcome you to our board. Okay. Item 1A through 1D are resolutions for retired California Board of Accountancy members, Xuan Ouyang and Kathleen Wright, and the retirement of the Enforcement Advisory Committee members, Joseph Beniva and Nancy Corrigan. Mr. Zhang served on the CBA from April 2015 to August. Can I get a motion to approve the resolution that's before you?
So moved.
Second.
Do I need a vote?
Are you doing all four resolutions or one?
Well,
Sounded like all four the way you
well, I was
described it.
announcing all four, but I'd like to do a resolution on each one, just to give them their due.
On the record.
Jose Campos.
Yes.
George Familet.
Yes.
Mary Jiang.
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Dan Jacobson.
Yes.
Sochi Leon.
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson.
Yes.
Katrina Salazar.
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
Yes,
And Mark Silverman.
Yes.
motion carries. Secondly, I'd like to get a motion to approve Ms. Wright.
So moved.
Second.
Vote,
Mark Silverman.
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
yes.
Katrina Salazar.
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson.
Yes.
Sochi Leon.
Yes.
Dan Jacobson.
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Mary Jiang.
Yes.
George Familet.
Yes.
And Jose Campos.
Yes.
Let's put together the last two, which there is Mr. Beniva from the EAC and also Ms. Corrigan who's another new board member but not here today, also served on the EAC. So let's do a motion for both of them.
Move.
Second.
Vote, please.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
George Familet,
Yes.
Mary Jiang,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes,
and Mark Silverman.
Yes.
motion carries. Thank you. Next item is a presentation regarding our participation at the NASBA State Board of Accountancies and the American Institute of CPAs committees, and an overview and the development of the administration of the Uniform CPA exam by Ms. Salazar.
Why, thank you, President Savoy. There is a handout in your hand-carried items in the blue folder that looks like this. I have, what, an hour and a half to talk? No, okay. I think the introduction to this, I was asked to do this to try to assist with some of the relationship that we are engaged in as Board of Accountancy. So I will say in the Sunset Review materials that are actually part of our board materials for this meeting, there's a lot of information about these organizations. But this is an attempt to summarize it briefly. So my apologies for not having a handout available up on screen. But what I do want to talk about is briefly what I see our role as being part of the fabric of regulators within the U.S. We are clearly the regulators for CPAs within California. We're very aware of that. And through mobility, we started conversations about how what other states are doing impact us. There are, on the next slide, just a reminder of 55 jurisdictions within the United States that are impacted by our mobility. And the parties that work together, we, as a board, every board member here is also a member of NASBO, which is the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy. So this may be redundant for some of you, but it took me a while, I will admit, to figure out the complexities of all these relationships. So NASBA, its mission is to serve the members by providing different services and avenues for common understanding and practices. So their role is to represent board members like us to help solve problems and promote uniformity, to facilitate interstate practice. Important to our board is that they take on that role of a central clearinghouse for information on CPA candidates, and from which our board receives its scores and exam data to report to the candidates. The other organization that we're involved in a tri-party agreement with is the American Institute of CPAs, so AICPA. So that is a national organization of CPAs. So what it does relevant to the Uniform CPA exam is the AICPA determines the content of the exam, they prepare the questions, they do the method for scoring, they prepare the advisory scores, and they analyze the results. So again, our board is not engaged in actually doing that. We work with AICPA. Prometric is a third party worth understanding, and they're a technology-enabled testing and assessment company. So what they do is they operate the testing centers, and those are the testing centers domestically here in California, throughout the 55 jurisdiction, and also overseas as well in some cases. So what I would share with you is that the candidate experience, for those of you who are licensed may not recall, for me it was a long time ago. You just know you want to apply to take the exam, you pay some fees, you get a notice, you schedule your exam, you hope you pass. It is not apparent to the candidate the complexity of how our organizations work together. So I did not think to put page numbers on these beautiful graphics, which I borrowed from wonderful partner organizations. But there is a map here which shows what happens. So the candidates, they submit a notice to schedule to NASBA, okay? NASBA sends a candidate authorization to Prometric. Prometric actually administers the exam. If we have a California candidate that needs some kind of special accommodations, maybe there's a physical disability that needs to be accommodated. If there's an additional cost to that, NASBA or Prometric tells NASBA, and NASBA sends us a bill, and we pay NASBA, and the money goes that way. AICPA is actually generating the tests, the security, generating the questions, going through psychometric processes, and sending those scores to NASBA that come back to our board to go to the candidates. So when we talk about how long the process takes, this is part of it. We have a very complex system with multiple organizations involved. This benefits, from my perspective, us as a board, because we don't have to design a state. We have an exam. We do have this nationally based test. Why this matters is what happens at these entities is very relevant to us as regulators within California. So I wanted to highlight, every year you see an invitation to volunteer with AICPA and NASBA. So there is a very distinct volunteer environment. Now, I will admit AICPA is large. They have a very significant volunteer environment. There are over 900 volunteers. So I've listed some of the volunteer roles outside of the board of directors. But the primary one that I would focus on for this presentation is just the Board of Examiners. They call it the BOE. And that's the body that sets the policy for the uniform CPA exam. And so they oversee the development, the scoring, they ensure the exam is consistent with the knowledge and skills of newly licensed CPAs. And periodically, they'll go out and do surveys of stakeholders to determine what level of knowledge, what does a new CPA need to know in order to be qualified to work as a CPA. And then they represent that CPA exam back to us as state board. So this is all, as a board member, kind of invisible because it just happens. But there is a lot of work behind this process. There are subcommittees to the Board of Examiners, and those are the Content Committee. There's a Psychometric Oversight Committee, which actually directs and evaluates the exam research and test development scoring, and there's a lot of information behind this. There is a state board committee, which, full disclosure, I am now a member of in 2018. That's the communication link between the board, the BOE and the board, our Board of Accountancy. So that structure works for all boards of accountancy. And then there are, again, it's a small committee, and they're responsible to report back to their boards as well as NASBA. So that is how we function as oversight of those examination processes. So until it actually isn't ever brought in front of us here, but there is a lot that happens on the back end. There are, of course, other committees within AICPA as well as NASBA, so I took the liberty of including more information. NASBA has about 20 different committees, and I've included some written materials, which are beautiful if you could see them up on an overhead. But there are specific committees that touch upon a lot of the things that we talked about in strategic planning. So there is, at NASBA's level, there's a CPA examination review board, computer-based testing administration committees. There is an education committee. And I will highlight that committee. And again, our members on our Board of Accountancy are eligible to put their names forward as volunteers. The education committee talks about things like competency-based education, accelerated programs of learning, online education, how life experience is incorporated into degree programs, and non-U.S. educational institutions. So again, a lot of the things that we're dealing with, there are existing committees made up of multiple stakeholders that we can avail ourselves of. There's an International Qualifications Appraisal Board, which is the one that goes through and drafts mutual recognition agreements. Just at our last board meeting, we had one presented to us, which we took an action on, and that's the committee that does the lion's share of the work. So I won't go through all of them, but from CPE to Uniform Accountancy Act, we do have the ability to engage with these partners, and that is part of our role as a board for oversight. So, and that's Katrina's opinion. There's a lot of work with sitting at this table, but what I would communicate to you is that there is a relationship that goes beyond the printouts that we receive at our board meetings, that is part of the fabric of our ability to protect consumers, and that information is available through organizations, whether or not you're looking at their website or you're looking at a printed copy of an annual report from NASBA or AICPA, and that the changes those organizations go through can impact our ability to do our jobs here. So I would say volunteer on committees, or at least consider your interest in doing that when those annual calls to action come out. Participate in conferences where you can. Be aware of what's happening on their website, as well as being open to receiving, or at least opening the emails that you're being sent by these organizations, because they do include important information. And of course, where you can, participate in outreach with these organizations. So I won't get into a lot of details, but it is important to understand that these things do happen in the background. And I thank you for your time and the request to put it on the agenda.
Any questions? Thank you so much for your report. President's prerogative, I'm jumping around because of time tonight. Let's go to item 1L, the Department of Consumer Affairs Director's Report on Departmental Activities. We have with us Karen Nelson, the Assistant Deputy Director, Office of Board and Bureau Services. Welcome.
There you go. There you go. Good afternoon, President Savoy, Vice President Familat, board members. Welcome, Board Member Jiang, and we look forward to working with you. As President Savoy said, Karen Nelson, Assistant Deputy Director with DCA's Board and Bureau Services. Thank you for allowing us time to provide a brief update with regard to recent activities at the department. First, I wanted to report that the department did award a contract for the Executive Officer Salary Study and have met with the consultants to kick off this project. From start to finish, the project is expected to take 6 months with an estimated completion date of early 2019, around March. The contractor will be expected to provide a comprehensive independent review and assessment of the board executive officer salary levels and evaluate changes that have occurred subsequent to the previous salary study conducted in 2011. The new study will assess the programmatic changes that have occurred over the years and how these changes have increased the operational complexity of our boards. The study will help us determine the degree to which these changes will support any future compensation augmentation. The goals that the department would like to focus on through the salary study are first, synthesizing the data and collect information to evaluate the salary bands of DCA programs and make determinations on how the data may or may not suggest an augmentation of the program's level. Second, determine what critical factors are used to support compensation increases in the exempt position review process. Third, evaluate gender parity for EO salaries across DCA programs. And finally, benchmark comparable positions comparable to other EOs in other states in the nation. Second thing I'd like to update on is the Director's Quarterly Meeting. The Director's Quarterly Meeting was on August 6th and included presentations from the Department of General Services, DCA's Equal Employment Opportunity Office, and DCA's Office of Human Resources. DGS previewed their plan for new construction that may house DCA in 2024. The Equal Employment Opportunity Office provided a primer on implicit bias, and the Office of Human Resources shared some new improvements on HR processes specific to recruitment and adverse actions. Ms. Jiang, just for your reference, Director Quarterly Meetings are meant to ensure the Director is available to our boards and bureaus and hear directly from them any issues that may be affecting their specific programs. The next Directors' Quarterly Meeting is scheduled for October 29th. Next up is the board member training, the required board member training. As a reminder, board members are required to complete board member orientation training within 1 year of appointment and reappointment to the board. And the next BMOT is scheduled for December 5th. This is a one-day training in Sacramento, which details important functions and responsibilities of board members. Please do contact DCA Solid Team if you're interested in attending. When 2019 dates are available, I'll be sure to share that with the board. And as always, if the department can be of service to you, please let us know. Thank you for your work and partnership.
Thank you
Any
so much.
questions?
Any questions? Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your work. We're going to move ahead to item letter H. As part of the 2010 and 2012 strategic plan, the CBA developed an employee recognition program as a way to acknowledge CBA staff for their dedication and efforts in assisting the CBA meet its mission of consumer protection. As a result, the CBA Leadership Award of Excellence was launched. This will be the 8th year that this award is being presented. Management evaluates all staff and nominates those who best meet the criteria, which includes providing consistently superior service through interactions with CBA staff, clients, or other external stakeholders, creating or implementing innovative practices, techniques, or systems resulting in significant improvements in service, and always exhibiting a positive attitude regarding work and coworkers. This year, the CBA has selected 2 members who have met and exceeded this criteria. Today, we will be recognizing one of those. That staff member is Malcolm Mitchell. Malcolm started with the CBA in 2015 as an associate governmental program analyst in the enforcement division. In Malcolm's current position, he is often the first line of contact with people that complain and licensee who are oftentimes frustrated. Malcolm is professional, kind, patient, and thorough with each call that he receives. He is a prime example for giving excellent consumer service. He has identified critical efficiencies for the intake unit, which have had a positive impact on the enforcement division. He is always willing to help and volunteers to complete the update articles, work on projects, and provide guidance to other CPAs. The award states that this award is being presented in recognition of demonstrated competence, dedication, and outstanding service in supporting the endeavors of the California Board of Accountancy in achieving its mission to protect the public. Congratulations.
They got it, never mind. Whatever. I didn't see it there.
Parents on you, 1, 2, 3. Keep it smiling. That's great. Thank you. I'll be signing.
Give it to him and you take it away.
Should we sign it later? All right.
Don't get too attached to that.
Before we conclude today, there's an item on the agenda that we're allowing at least 30 minutes. So let's start it and finish it, and after we finish this particular agenda item, we'll break for the day. That would be item I, the discussion or review of the proposed responses to the 2018 Sunset Review. That'll be both Patty and Dominic.
Thank you and good morning, or good afternoon, sorry. So this is item This is the discussion and review of proposed responses for the 2018 Sunset Review Report. This is the second iteration of the proposed content for inclusion in the CBA's 2018 Sunset Review Report. This iteration of the Sunset Report includes responses to, there was a handful of remaining questions and requests for information that was left out or under construction in the prior iteration. We have filled that all in, and it also includes feedback on, or any of the feedback the members provided us last time at the July meeting. Before I jump into it, I wanted to note that in your second mail-out materials, there was a sunset-related item, and it was about a 4 or 5 page item on peer review. It specifically related to Section 10 and Issue 1 in Section 10, related to CBA action responses to the prior sunset issue. I will cover that material when I go over that particular section. So when I get to Section 10, I'll note that we're moving to that particular handout. It is important to remember that the Sunset Report is the CBA's primary and initial opportunity to shape the narrative of its activities and achievements over the prior 4 fiscal years. While this will not be the last version of the Sunset, the next iteration that you'll be seeing in November meeting will be presented as a final version form, including layout and design at that time. So the feedback we received today will be instrumental in making sure that that last version that you guys have an opportunity to see is as full of form as possible. I realize that there are a number of members who were not at the last meeting as we went over the first iteration of the Sunset. I will be going section by section, and I will primarily be focusing on any new information or any substantive changes, but I welcome any input on any of the questions along the way. That way I can incorporate that into your final iteration. As I complete each section, I will turn discussion back over to President Savoy, and I'll be happy to answer any questions members may have. The one change that will be happening is that for Section 4 on the licensing program, I will turn over discussion for that to Ms. Bowers, as much of the information is similar to the cover memo she provided for the licensing activity report. So with that, I'll jump right into Section 1 of your report, which is the attachment to the agenda item. And Section 1 of the report starts on page 1, and it concludes out on page 27. This section covers, again, a wide range of topics, from high-level overview of the history of the CBA and its profession, the profession it regulates, information on the CBA, its members, its committees, major changes that include statutes and regulations affecting the CBA, accomplishments and studies, and studies undertaken by the CBA since the last Sunset Review Report. All of that falls into this one 27-page section. The more significant changes to the report since the last iteration include adding enhanced outreach as a major accomplishment, as this was requested by members at the last meeting, and this can be found on page 12 of the report. It's similar to information that was further back in the report, so the narrative and the messaging is the same, but we moved it up to identify it as a major accomplishment over the last 4 years. Additionally, we've included multiple tables for various national meeting activities that the CBA participated in, either in person or via teleconference. And these can be found on pages 24 through 26 of your report. And lastly, we've also included, again, as requested by members, narrative on the benefits of the governor's office approving out-of-state travel, which can be found on page 26 under the last table. I do know a couple of quick items were identified on the out-of-state or the activities tables that needs to be updated. I know Mr. Savoy attended one of the meetings, and it wasn't Mr. Campos, and I believe there was an extra meeting that we actually didn't get out-of-state travel approved that I'll be taking off. So with that,
I couldn't remember the meeting.
So with that, I'm happy to turn discussion back over of this topic over to President Savoy, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have or any edits and feedback.
there any specific, hopefully you had,
On page 10, where we talk about mobility and the do we intend to add a sentence in there about the SB 795, kind of making it permanent? I saw it referenced somewhere else later in the legislative part of it, but
We can. Part of it is, there's always this weird balance of dealing with things that
happened.
happened,
Subsequent.
that started at some part of a fiscal year, ended in the next, but I have no issue dealing with including
That was the
sentences
only
about
question I had
795.
on that section.
yeah, the only thing I want to stress is that when these materials come out before the November meeting, since it's our last pass-through, that everybody spend special time in preparing to go over this in November. So it's our last pass-through, so please, we're going through it again today, but that's going to be it, so please. Okay, any other questions, Dominic?
Thank you. So moving on to section 2, which is on pages 28 and 33 of the report. And this area focuses on performance measures and customer satisfaction survey. Staff have updated this section to include the links to the various performance measure reports requested in question 5. At this point, I'd like to quickly highlight, I think I said it in the cover memo, I forgot to state it up front. We're trying to minimize the amount of paper attachments to this document. They're voluminous. If we added the mobility report, all the annual reports, all of these things, it would get quite large. So we're trying to use links to web pages and make it as interactive as possible so that we're not having to produce a significantly large volume. So this is one of the areas where we've incorporated that, and there are links to the various DCA-related reports on enforcement and annual report statistics that DCA houses. Additionally, since the last iteration, staff developed charts with statistical information related to both the CBA stakeholder satisfaction survey and the DCA consumer satisfaction survey. Specific to the CBA satisfaction survey, again, over the majority of the full 4 fiscal year period, the CBA experienced positive stakeholder satisfaction. However, the CBA did see a decrease in that area, especially over the last year. When we received the negative feedback, we looked to leverage this information to improve the CBA's quality of service. Lack of technology tends to be a primary driver for the lack of satisfaction, especially reliance on paper-based documentation, paper-based submissions, and inability to pay electronically. While we await the more comprehensive business modernization plan with DCA, we are working to allow credit card payments for license renewal. We're hopeful that'll take place at the end of this year. We're hoping that'll actually have some positive impact on some of the satisfaction survey. And I think that's really the only new information we've added to this section. So with that, I'm happy to turn it back over to President Savoy and answer any questions members may have.
Yes, Mr. Jacobs?
On pages 29 and 30, the charts, when the heading in the column that says number, is that the gross number of surveyed people?
It's my understanding that's the number of responses received.
And then, okay, and then gotcha, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay.
You know, what do you expect to come out of, because they are deteriorating results, right, in terms of that. Is there anything else you thought proactively we could include in here to address that? Do you think it's all around technology stuff, or do we think it better just deal with it in response mode?
I think, in all honesty, in the next iteration, I'll be fleshing that out more, looking at the trends from the 16, 17, and 17, 18. That's where you started to see that shift down. Ms. Bowers and I really kind of focused on 17, 18 because that's the most current set of information we have. But if we see that trend continuing back into 15, 16, I think we'll probably reshape that narrative a little bit to be more poignant and what other information CBA management can think of in terms of being more proactive, not just in the credit card payment, but in maybe other areas. I know we talked about sending staff, all staff had completed last month or so, the 7 Cs of customer service and other items of that to try to return those numbers to the previous levels.
Thank you. Okay.
Section 3, which is on pages 34 through 45 of the report, focus on fiscal and staff issues. At the July meeting, there was a request that staff provide more context on the fee changes over the past 4 fiscal years. As kind of the fee information is scattered throughout a couple of the questions, we've incorporated this information into 2 specific questions. Question number 10, which is on pages 35 and 36, and into question 14 on pages 39 and 40. And it just kind of provides the arc of how we were back in, coming out of the last sunset, coming through this sunset, and provided just more detail on how we went from 200 to 120, back to, or down to 50. I think we're at 120 now, going back up to 250. And it interplays with some information later in the report on a new issue related to a fee change. So the remainder of that narrative of this section remained relatively substantively unchanged. I know we need to fill in some last year fiscal information. We obviously just really recently just got that, so that'll obviously be incorporated into the final iteration. At this point, I'm happy to turn it back over to President Savoy and answer any questions members may have.
Two nits. Page 35, in question 10, the year, I think you, $200 in 2000 something, is probably off in there. Second paragraph, first line. Question 10.
Yeah.
You got it? And then on page 38, the table under question 12, table 3, I guess, is that personnel services or it says personal? Maybe this is just a template on how that's laid out. But it says personal services versus personnel services.
Should have-
It's probably personnel, and I
Yeah.
probably just copied it wrong.
I figured that.
Yeah, I don't mind, I'll take ownership.
That's all I have. Great job on the fee. I think it does, I mean, at least I understand it, and it tells the story of where we've been, so it's helpful.
Any other questions in this section? Okay.
So at this point, I'd like to turn discussion on the overview of section 4 on the licensing program over to Ms. Bowers.
Okay, I'll be focusing my comments primarily on question 18 on page 46 and question 19 on page 48. These 2 questions relate to an area of internal operation that is presently receiving a significant level of attention at the executive management level, and I want to provide members an update on the progress being made. Because much of what I'll be covering and what's in this section was included in the licensing activity report, or the LAR, this will serve as the presentation on agenda item 9A. Question 18 on page 46 focuses on the board's performance targets and expectations in the licensing program. It asks if the board is meeting performance expectations, and if not, what we are doing to improve. By way of background, the board has established a goal of 30 days or less to process applications to sit for the CPA exam and applications to become licensed. This goal is also reflected in the board's strategic plan, and for many years we have been successfully achieving it. However, as noted on the chart on page 46, application processing timeframes have been increasing. Presently, we are at an average of 38 days for exam applications and 47 days for licensure applications. Over the past several months, I have been working closely with management and staff in the licensing program to determine why processing timeframes are going up, exceeding the 30 days, and what action we need to do in order to address it. There are 2 primary issues impacting processing timeframes. One, the reliance on temporary staff, and then also the lack of automation. For the past couple years, our licensing program has relied heavily on temporary staff to address workload demands. Given the nature of temporary positions, there's a high turnover rate in these positions. The staff leave to secure permanent positions. This often occurs after we have dedicated significant time and resources not only to recruit but also to train these individuals. Although we will continue our efforts through the budget process to secure permanent positions, we are simultaneously focusing on identifying internal process improvements and staffing adjustments that I believe will allow us to return to processing all applications in 30 days or less. Frequent internal workgroup sessions have been held over the past several months to identify opportunities for process improvements while also maintaining the high quality of our work. Some of the improvements identified include increasing the use of email and phone calls when interacting with applicants and licensees, improving communication through the development of video messages, brochures, and easier-to-read instructions and forms, streamlining our internal workflows, cross-training additional staff in critical areas, and scheduling staff to work weekends when needed for a short-term solution. Further, there's been an internal task force that has been established to work closely with senior management on implementing the improvements as quickly and seamlessly as possible. We successfully employed a similar process in the enforcement program a couple years ago, and we continue to experience achieved improvements today. With regard to the lack of automation, many of our internal processes are manual. The CBA, as we've talked about today, uses the Department of Consumer Affairs' very antiquated system, as well as several standalone database systems for tracking and monitoring workflow and producing the many statistics that we come up with, not only for the board agenda materials, for sunset review, legislative reports, and others. And although the board is working with the Department of Consumer Affairs to launch a business modernization project to implement a singular system, that really is a long-term solution. We're scheduled to begin identifying our business needs in July, with the launch of the new system targeted for fiscal year 2021-22. So because the launch of the new systems is still years away, in the interim, and to the extent possible, we're going to be working with our own internal information technology staff to identify some automated achievements or improvements. Some of these increased areas of automation that we're working towards include allowing applicants to submit documents electronically, providing applicants the ability to check the status of their application online, and easier access to applications and forms through an online portal. The board's recent decision to pursue legislation to require individuals to provide and maintain a valid address with the board, I believe will greatly assist in this area. Question 19 on page 48 focuses on pending and approved applications. Over the past 4 fiscal years, we have consistently received more applications than we have approved. The majority of applications, when we receive them, are incomplete. This results in multiple communications with the applicant and having to process or touch the application multiple times. The steps that we're taking to streamline processes combined with the improvements in our communication should dramatically reduce the number of applications that come to us deficient. As we work through these process improvements, there may be a continued period of time that processing timeframes are elevated. However, know that we're working diligently to address the situation, and I expect us to return to processing all applications in 30 days or less in the months ahead. As I conclude my comments on section 4, I did note that we may want to add some clarifying information or some additional footnotes in some of the charts, so we'll make those changes and they'll be reflected in the final version of the report when it comes to you in November. So at this time, I'll turn it back over to President Savoy and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions on this? Mr. Fox has a question.
Just very briefly, just a couple comments. I think this has kind of been spread out throughout the course of the conversation, some of the strategic planning earlier today. The licensing delays and the processes and the lack of technology and the paper components, does lead to real impact on the licensees and the applicants going into the process. And really, a small delay through the process of getting your license or sitting for the exam can really impact your career path, and that impacts the pipeline of services, and that impacts the services ultimately to the consumer. So first, I would applaud the board for the internal efforts to streamline those processes within the parameters that they can work within. And then We would support the board in their efforts to to get the resources and technology components that they need to do the job that they need to do, however that might be. So I just wanted to be on the record that we're supportive of the board's efforts to go towards the automation. It is 2018, and I know we have a couple more years to get to this, but hopefully we can get there a little bit sooner. So.
Thank you. Any other questions of the board on this section? All right, well, yes.
I would just like to mention, not on anything that Ms. Bowers covered, but there was one additional, those were the two major sections that we'd left unanswered. There was a request on, it was question 22, and it's like subdivision C, and it answer starts on the bottom of page 53, carries over to 54. There was a question on providing additional detail related to fingerprint information and its impact and some of the activities that kind of went around that. So we've included increased narrative and a chart to help illustrate some of the activities that were associated with our fingerprint activities, especially related to the retroactive fingerprint. So I just wanted to highlight that quickly.
Okay.
Right above that on 22B, reread the response there. There's a question and it just doesn't seem like the answer pops out right away when you look at that.
Will do.
Quick question. Back on the application type, there's a sentence that says over the past 4 years, the board has consistently received more applications than is approved. But the 15, 16, and 16, 17, we approved more applications than we received. So if that is in totality across, like in total, maybe we could just clarify that. Because that just jumped out at me looking at CPA exam applications as being untrue.
Yeah.
Next section.
Okay, moving on to section 5. This starts on page 65 and runs through page 82. And section 5 of the report highlights the board's enforcement program. The only substantial change to this section was narrative for the first two questions. This was questions 34 and 35. It's similar to the idea that Ms. Bowers went over related to its trend analysis, performance measures, but these are specific to the board's enforcement program. Question 34 notes that the CBA uses the Department of Consumer Affairs Consumer Protection Enforcement Initiative for its performance measures, and we've included a table. And as noted in the table, the two areas the CBA does not presently meet are Performance Measure 3 or PM3 related to cycle time, investigation cycle time, and PM4 formal discipline cycle time. Historically, the CBA has not met the performance measure 4 on formal discipline. However, for the last fiscal year, the CBA was slightly over the target timeframe for PM3. Much of the narrative for question 34 focuses on the improvements made in the enforcement program over the past 4 fiscal years. As the report notes, leading into the last sunset, the CBA had accrued a large volume of cases. This resulted in many cases aging beyond the established performance measures. CBA management, and specifically Ms. Bowers, took active steps to mitigate the impending case aging, including the hiring of a new chief, the restructuring of the program, along with numerous other details that we've highlighted on pages 66 and 67 of the report. As these important improvements took place and the CBA resolved the cases by taking appropriate action, whether or not it was through closure, through discipline, through citation, to address the aged inventory, these cases impacted, obviously, the associated time frame. These changes and improvements in the enforcement program, however, have positioned the CBA to reestablish meeting Performance Measure 3 and then to continue to work towards and more closely align with meeting Performance Measure 4. As for question 35, it kind of asks similar information as 34 as it relates to performance measures. So we've let 34 kind of speak to that in response for 35. But it also asks some additional information, some additional statistical information on trends. And the other statistical areas the CBA collects to effectively monitor enforcement program. And so beginning on page 68 and running through page 70, We've highlighted these areas, which include cases assigned and closed, case closure inventory, pending investigation inventory, pending AG inventory, and discipline. I'd really only like to highlight 3 of the charts from this group. Our investigations closed, which is at the bottom of page 68. The pending AG office inventory on pages 69 and 70, and the disciplinary action investigation at the bottom of page 70. The chart on the bottom of page 68 shows that 2/3 of the cases closed by the CBA in the last fiscal year were done within the first 6 months, and 3/4 were closed within a year. As for the pending AG inventory, over the past 4 fiscal years, the CBA has seen a 42% decrease in the inventory at the AG's office, with a high of 119 closing out fiscal year 14-15 to a low of last year of 69. Lastly, on disciplinary actions, this 4 fiscal year window that incorporates this report represent the highest total number of actions taken by the CBA over any period by far. Between fiscal years 10-11 and 13-14, which made up the board's prior sunset review, the CBA took 140 actions, while this 4-year period, the CBA has taken 330 actions. The remaining narrative of this section stayed pretty much unchanged and was non-substantive in nature. And with that, I'd like to turn discussion back over to President Savoy, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on this section?
Couple nits on page 71. The average days of SOIs for that middle column and the average under license denial, right, the 775 and then below that the 807, they look, I don't know if those were right numbers, but they looked out of place when you look at that chart.
We'll rerun it and take a look at them.
And the average days of accusations are probably correct. That just that SOI one on license denials just seems off. And then on 73, you got table 9B, I guess that is. There's a number there on average days to close, you know, your investigations, and they look like the non-sworn are the same as your all investigations. And for the 2017-18, I assume they should just be the same number, right? So
Yeah, we'll take a look, just clean it up.
Thank you. Yes, Katrina?
On table 9B, there's a whole section where everything unless I misheard that, which just says NA. Is that to be populated?
No, we calculate all that in the non-sworn investigations.
Is it like a required
We,
field? I'm
Miss-
just curious why we're
yeah.
putting in 3 rows that don't apply.
Yeah, Ms. Bowers and I had spoken yesterday. There's a most of the tables you see in here, if they have a number associated with like 9, 10, 9A, 9B, these were all driven by the Sunset Review Report, and they're the kind of one size
Just
fits all.
populating.
So
Got it.
there's a lot of things that are not applicable to all the boards and bureaus. We've tried to address them where appropriate. I think one of the things we're going to be looking to do is just remove certain areas where it's just generally not applicable, to just get it out of there. We'll footnote that we've done it, so the committee understands that we've made that change, but that way the narrative or the table and the information flows better.
I'm okay, I just want to make sure it was a standard format.
And also for the final version that you'll see in November, that will incorporate kind of a new look and feel. So we're just using the prior format now, but as far as the color or any graphs or those kinds of things, you'll see that in the final version in November.
Then on question 38 on page 76, there's this section on insurance companies and reporting. And is it just chemical, or are there other insurance companies that have to report to you if they're not insured through this? That was just kind of the question I had.
Yes, if their insurance carrier is somebody other than Cameco, but Cameco is by far the largest. And so they're the one, in some ways, we focused on. I know they came out to the board a few years ago to report on insurance information, so they're our primary focus, but,
Okay. So it's sort of an example.
Yeah.
But you're, okay, got it.
All right, next section.
Sections 6 and 7 related to public information policies and practice issues. There weren't any changes, so I was going to just move on to section 8 unless there were some specific questions members had on those particular areas. and those run on pages 83 to 85. And then for section 6 and for section 7, it's page 86.
Any questions on those?
Keep on trucking.
All right.
So section 8 deal is on workforce development, and this is on pages 87 to 89. The only new information are questions 61 and 63. Again, Ms. Bowers covered some of the impact licensing delays have. Mr. Fox also has come up and explained the difficulty with the licensing delays. And for both questions, as they deal with delays and barriers, we note the delays in licensing do have an impact on licensure and employment, and we indicate that the CBA is committed to returning processing periods to the targeted timeframes. So that's the only new information to those sections, or, to section 8, sorry. And with that, I'll turn it back over and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions? Move along.
Section 9 is titled Current Issues. It is on page 90 to 91. Question 67 on the bottom of page 90, and on the top of 91 is the only new information. This was previously under construction. Question 67 focuses on IT issues affecting the board. It's really focused on Breeze, but obviously as Breeze is no longer a system that this board is moving to, we've answered our question under the business modernization project the DCA is working under. The report notes that this project is a multi-year project, and we emphasize that the success of this project includes receiving additional resources to address the workload. And this is really for the subject matter experts we have to dedicate to it, that we have staff behind them who can continue to process and perform the essential functions that the board performs. The response also highlights that the present CBA efforts underway to launch an online payment system for the license renewal that is expected to be in place by the end of the year. So with that, I'm happy to turn it back over and answer any questions you may have.
Questions on this section? Yes.
Actually, I'm sorry, I missed something in the previous section. It's a typo. Page 88, under 63. The last sentence, the recognizes, I assume that should be the CBA recognizes.
Yes, I'll take care of it.
All right.
Let's see, so moving on to section 10. This, in your report, or in the attachment, it begins on page 92 and ends on 98, and it deals with CBA action and responses to the prior sunset issue. This is where I would direct your attention to the second mail out and the item related to peer review. The CBA did look at the other 4 issues that make up this section back in March, and staff have incorporated those set requests and edits and feedback into that. The only thing that remained was the CBA issue 1 on peer review. I will focus my discussion on section 10 to this particular issue. And so committee staff at the last sunset process required the CBA to conduct a survey on the benefits of peer review, and also to report on actions taken against firms that receive substandard peer review reports and report by November 1. We did get confirmation from committee staff, both on the Assembly and the Senate, that they're fine waiting for this information to be included with the submission of our sunset review report on December 1st. So this will be turned over in one big narrative as opposed to being piecemealed between this one response and then the rest of our sunset review report. The first 2.5 pages of the response include information related to the survey the CBA conducted. Of the 346 respondents who answered the kind of the overarching question regarding whether their firm benefited from peer review, nearly 60% agreed. Of the benefits identified, I believe we had 198 responses to that question. 80% indicated the peer review assisted with ensuring the professional standards are maintained, which is one of the pillars and cornerstones of why peer review is in existence. As part of the survey, we also inquired about some of the difficulties firms were experiencing. Most firms had issue with the AICPA's new peer review database called Prima, and that stemmed from either whether it was logging onto it, uploading documents, or finding certain discrepancies related to their peer review ratings. And respondents also identified cost of peer review was a difficulty. Prima and scheduling peer reviewer population are things that we've identified in here that the PROC is looking at and reports back to the board on an annual basis. So that's an area that's being monitored by the board. As for the enforcement actions arising from substandard peer review reports, over the last 4 fiscal years, the CBA has opened 500 cases associated with substandard reports. The CBA took disciplinary action on 35 cases. I do notice there's a typo on that last little sentence where it says of the 32 disciplinary actions, the CBA placed 32. It should be of the 35 disciplinary actions. So of the 35 cases, 32 licensees were put on probation, with 17 licensees having a permanent restriction. The issue concludes with the CBA expressing an opinion that the peer review program is essential to its mission to protect consumers. The remaining issues, 2 through 5, again, were previously discussed by the CBA in March and have been updated to reflect those discussions. So with that, I'm turning back over to President Savoy, and I'm happy to answer any questions members may have.
Anything on this section? Okay. I'll skip one of these.
All right, so moving on to section 11. Section 11 of the report highlights new issues and begins on page 99 and concludes on page 103. This section is all new. None of this existed in the prior iteration other than the topics that we were considering. And right now it covers 5 new issues the CBA believes would be instrumental to allowing it to maintain and further its consumer protection mandate and to provide better service to its various stakeholders. And the 5 identified issues are staffing, automation online services, increasing the statutory maximum for the license renewal fee, allow for electronic distribution of the update newsletter, and require licensees to report an email address. Issues 1 and 2 are similar and consistent narrative that's been throughout the report, especially as it relates to Section 4 in the licensing program, so I'm not going to go into any real detail on those 2 issues. Issue 3, on the increase to the statutory maximum, with the action being taken by the CBA earlier this year to promulgate rulemaking to increase the license renewal fee to $250, this will place the CBA at its statutory maximum level. The President's maximum has been in place of $250 has been in place for about 30 years. And so to ensure there is sufficient flexibility in the event the CBA needs to pursue a fee increase in the future to address enforcement or operational needs, the CBA is seeking an increase of the maximum fee to $500. Issue 4 is a request to allow the CBA to automate the delivery of its update newsletter. The Accountancy Act requires that the CBA prepare and distribute to all licensees a report of various board activities. In discussion with DCA Legal Office, the use of the word distribute necessitates and requires a hard copy distribution. So to increase messaging, reduce environmental impact, and reduce overall overhead costs, the CBA is seeking legislative amendment to the Accountancy Act to facilitate an electronic distribution method.
That seems like a goofy item to have in a sunset review thing. I mean, it just seems like an operational thing that we would just deal with, right?
In some ways, what the sunset does, what this particular area is, they want to know about any proposals, packages, any legislative ideas that they can help you with. And so
Well, we think this requires legislation before we can move?
it does.
Believe it.
It's true, I'm sorry.
That sounds ridiculous.
Well, think about it this way.
Something like
The
this
board is
requires a regulation
Well, here's the-
change?
Well,
Here's the
statutory
thing.
change, not regulation, statutory change.
The Practice Act requires CBA to distribute this. And the only way to distribute it electronically would be to have everyone's email addresses, and you don't have the authority to make everybody provide an email address. And you also, the way the statute's written,
You can't just have people go to the website and download it. So it just needs to be rejiggered, the language in the statute, and sorry, it's the ugly
So we
truth.
can't act on that part of what we intend to do until that happens?
Basically, yeah. But, I mean, I did read one of the upcoming update articles, and at least there's going to be, it looks like, an attempt to get people the opportunity to get an electronic copy, and those who still want to get a paper copy will still get a paper copy, so you're not completely cutting out the paper. But probably, once it's available electronically, I bet you're going to have a lot of people who are going to ask for it electronically.
So the last issue would seek a legislative change to require licensees provide an email address to increase communication, provide an additional method of contact. The CBA discussed this topic at its meeting in July and directed staff to seek such legislative change. So for issues 3 through 5, these all require some type of legislative change to effectuate the request. So for the final iteration, the CBA will be reviewing in November. This will be one of the paper attachments. Will include, incorporate proposed legislative language for consideration as part of that final proposal. I will say there might be one additional new issue that we're kind of in the parking lot. We're waiting to see if Assembly Bill 2138 that's dealing with denial of applications gets signed. There's some outstanding items that the board had concern with that the final iteration of that bill did not address. And so Mr. Bone will be speaking about that a little bit tomorrow, and depending on if the governor signs that bill, we might be adding a new issue to help address some of the issues that the board had related to 2138, but we thought it was premature to kind of include that before it was either signed or vetoed. So he hadn't signed it as of today. So I'm done. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to President Savoy, and if there's any additional feedback, comments, and if there's any additional edits or punctuation, grammar, please feel free to just provide that to Ms. Bowers, and she'll make sure it gets to me.
I have a technical legislative question. To whom is this mailed? Is it mailed to the consultants for the business profession committees in both houses, or?
We submit it to the actual committee, so we'll submit it to the chair and vice chair of the Assembly BMP and Senate BMP, and then the consultants and a laundry list of other people will be CC'd. Again, the goal this time around is to do electronic submissions, so that way we're not having to produce too many of these things.
Thank you.
And just a final note, and Dominic, he touched on this, but I just want to make sure members, I want to flesh out just a minute more. The new section, Section 11, when we go through the sunset review process, it's the legislature's opportunity to really evaluate us as an organization and our performance and whether or not we should exist. But it also provides us an opportunity to work with the legislative staff and the legislatures on how they can help us. And this is a section where they tell us, wherever you need our help, wherever you need our support, make sure you put it in this section. And sometimes it's at the end of the session, they'll do a sunset bill, similar to like the omnibus bill. And so all of our legislation gets folded up into that sunset bill, which is very helpful. In other areas where they may not have direct authority, they can offer their influence. And so an example of that, the automation or online services, right now that's not technically a legislative issue. If it's important enough to our board and the profession and they hear that information, they could, for example, legislatively mandate the implementation of automation sooner or some other version of that. Same with staffing. Typically the legislature, they're not involved in staffing. That's a whole separate process through state government, but they do have interest in us being able to protect consumers and do our job well. And so sometimes having those other topics allows them to offer during that hearing their influence or their comments or expectations on how things will happen going forward. So as you look over this for the final time and we present it in November, if in the interim you identify or think of any other topics that we should flesh out for the version in November, I would say send those to me directly. Don't wait until November because that will be probably too late for us to do much more with it, so.
And
That-
we
thank
will be
you.
disseminating December 1, so it'll be a quick turnaround after the November meeting.
All right, a couple items of housekeeping. We have 2 hearings tomorrow, time certain, starting at 9 o'clock. And also, there's a default decision that's being added to the agenda that they want to hand to us to at least read tonight, so we're prepared. Otherwise, we have to postpone that till November. So everybody make sure,
Didn't we already get it?
I don't think we did. I don't think we, is it here?
Is it this one?
Okay, so everybody, please take a copy.
We
Okay.
already passed it around.
I got mine.
Okay.
It's somewhere.
Yep.
All right, please
Yours,
take it and
Mr.
read it.
Savoy, President Savoy.
Thank, oh, that's mine, I knew something was happening. All right, with that, Phil's attending dinner, 6 o'clock, about a few minutes from here. Echo and Fig.
Echo-
Rig.
Echo and Rig.
Rig, I knew it was something like that. All right, we're.